at now. Remember, some of them are more common in different subtypes than others. This is just the first broad overpass. So beginning to make sense of the disease. What it is, above all else, is a disease of cognitive abnormalities, of abnormal sequential thought. And the term that's given for it is loose associations. All of us can tell a story where we have a pretty good ability to put it sequentially and have the facts go in a way where it will make sense to any other listener. You do not see this in schizophrenics. Sequential thinking is greatly impaired. And instead of having logical sequences of information that they give, things tangent all over the place, bouncing around all over, where in retrospect, you can kind of see how they might have gotten from A to Z, although most people would have gone from A to B at that point. The tangential thinking being another term for it, the loose associations. So what do you wind up seeing there? You get schizophrenics, for example, who get terribly confused in a sentence, whether when they are hearing about boxers, they are unable to keep straight within one sentence to separate out whether they're talking about a dog or they're talking about an occupation, because they slip back and forth between the two. Confusion between being a caddy, someone who golf, whatever, and a Cadillac, short term for that. All sorts of ways in which they can't hold on to the sequential logic, and instead there's just this tangenting, getting caught up in the loose associations. You're talking about a boxer. If you're schizophrenic, you're talking about a particular boxer, you follow that sport, whatever, and suddenly you're expressing an opinion about how that person would do in a ring against a St. Bernard. And you're often talking about dogs from there, just getting caught by a loose association between the sound of the word and its multiple meanings, going off the tracks on that. So the loose associations. Next, you have a consistent one with abstraction. All of us have a pretty good intuitive sense when someone is telling us a story. Is this meant to be literal reporting of events in a sequential way? Is this meant to be a parable? Is this meant to be a somewhat second-hand through the grapevine story? We have a very good sense of how concrete or how abstract the information that we're getting is. Schizophrenics are terrible at that. They have no intuition to get the right level of abstraction. And schizophrenics always skew in the same direction, which is to interpret things far more concretely than is actually the case. And that's the term that's used in the business, concreteness of thought, which is having a lot of trouble doing the more abstract process of seeing things on a metaphorical level, things of that sort. So here's a standard sort of test you would give to someone if you think they're schizophrenic. You give them an association task. And you say something like, okay, can you tell me what do these things have in common? An apple, an orange, and a banana. And they'll say, all of them are multisyllabic words. You'll say, okay, well, that's great, that's true, but anything else they have in common? Yep, all of them have letters that involved closed loops. Just getting caught up in the most concrete possible level of interpretations of it, not able to step back and do any sort of abstracting. You see this in all sorts of other ways. Therapist will meet the patient and say something like, so what's on your mind today? And they'll say, my hair, in this very literal sort of way. Or you'll say, can I take your picture, holding a camera? And they'll say, I don't have a picture to give you. This very literal sense again. Or things like, you would sit down as schizophrenic with a piece of paper and a pen and say, just as part of what we're doing here, can you write a sentence for me? Any sentence. And then you look at what they've written, which is a sentence for me, any sentence. And then you say, no, actually that's not what I mean. I mean, can you come up with a sentence, and when you've thought of that sentence, write it. And they'll write the word it, because they can't get out of the concreteness of saying, could you write a sentence? Can you write, a sentence? They're caught up in the concrete level of that. A way that always pops up, one of the classic types of tests that's done is called proverb tests. Proverbs, by definition, they are metaphorical, they are parables, they are abstract, and we all know intuitively that when you're talking about birds of a feather flock together, you're doing something sort of symbolic about the well-known homogamy of lips with and people and who they choose to marry and the similarities. Yes, birds of a feather flock together, it's talking about like tend to assort with like. Give Proverbs to schizophrenics and they can't get out of the most concrete level of interpretation of it. So you sit them down and you say, okay, tell me what this means. A rolling stone gathers no moss. And we all know that people are on the move, don't make emotional connections, there's a detachment, whatever. And they're often saying, stones rolling down hills, it's very hard for plants to grow on them. It's very hard because the surface tends to be smooth, and then on top of it, if it's rolling, you got like this angular motion that will trip. So it's very hard for moss to grow on stones. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen that happen, and I've seen many stones, and on the most concrete possible level, incapable of pulling it back to the level of abstraction. Consistent feature of this. Here, a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist came up with what has to be one of the all-time great proverb tests for figuring out if someone has the remotest tendency towards schizophrenic concreteness. There was an abstract phrase, sort of proverb, that was very popular, that was very prevalent in the United States during World War II. It was up on posters in all the post offices, places like that, and it was a way of abstractly telling people, be careful the information you put in letters that you were sending off to loved ones who were off at war, because it may inadvertently wind up in the wrong hands and could carry information that could be extremely damaging to the war effort. Okay, do people know what it is? Loose lips sink ships. Loose lips sink ships, wonderfully abstract notion. Try sitting down a schizophrenic and saying, what does it mean when you say loose lips sink ships? And suddenly there's this imagery of ships being capsized by big lips coming out of the water and things of that sort, because it can only be dealt with on the very concrete level. What else? More symptomatology. Delusions, belief in things that cannot be, belief in having participated in historical events that cannot be. You're sitting there interviewing a schizophrenic and they suddenly say, have you heard of the Great Wall of China? And you will say, well, yes, in fact, I have. And they'll say, my idea. My idea. The generals came to me at night with a map and I said, this is where